So I've been thinking about dominant chords recently and how, unlike any other chord types, a dominant chord, you can add almost any other note to it and it still works. And I'm not just talking about diatonic extensions, I mean like any note, except for a major 7, because a major 7 would then change the whole function of the chord. But other than the major 7, like any note. Why is that? Let's have a look. Okay, so here's a simple progression. 1, 4, 2, 5, 1. I'm going to add all these other extensions in, and you can hear that it still works. So first I'm just going to add in the 9. And now I'm going to add in the 11th. This time I'm going to add in the 13th. Here it comes. Flat 9. Last one was the sharp 5 or the flat 13. Now I know that's not all the notes, but I think that those notes could all be added into any style of music, from pop to jazz and anything in between, and it wouldn't sound out of place. Now, other than the major 7, which we talked about earlier, there's only 2 notes now that we haven't used: the sharp 9 and the sharp 11, or the flat 5. Now, the dominant 7 with the sharp 9 is quite a popular chord in funk and blues rock. It's sometimes called the Hendrix chord because it's got that sound. Hendrix used it a lot. So we get nice use out of the sharp 9. And if we jazz things up a little bit, we can make the sharp 11 work nicely as well. In jazz, we can really hammer up and add multiple extensions on top of each other on that dominant chord. And it still works. And this got me thinking, why is this possible on dominant 7 chords but not on other chord types? And here's what I thought. Well, first things first, what is a dominant chord, also known as a 7 chord? Well, it's a chord made up of these intervals: root note, major 3rd, perfect 5th, and a flat 7. Now, more times than not, a dominant chord functions as a 5 chord that then resolves to some sort of 1 chord. It resolves because it wants to. If you listen, it's just hanging in the air waiting to be resolved. It needs the resolution. Now, any chord is really characterized by its 3rd and its 7th. The root note gives it context, but the 3rd and the 7th really give it its identity. So let's compare the 3rd and the 7th of different chord types. For a major 7 chord, the interval between the 3rd and the 7th is a perfect 4th or a perfect 5th, depending on which way you invert it. Now, if we look at a minor 7 chord, we'll see that it's the same. C minor 7, the 3rd and 7th, C minor 7. It's a perfect 4th, or if we invert it, a perfect 5th. Right, what about dominant 7? Well, if you didn't already know or you hadn't already guessed, this one's a little bit different. Let's have a look. So the interval between the 3rd and the 7th of a dominant chord is a tritone. Now, a tritone is just another name for a sharpened 4th or a flattened 5th. I'm assuming it's called tritone because it's got 3 tones between the notes. And an interesting thing to notice is that if we invert the tritone like we've done on the other chords, it's still a tritone. It's that sharp 4 or the flat 5. So it's a tritone, however it's inverted. And that's because the tritone is the halfway point of an octave. There's exactly 6 semitones or 3 tones on either side. Now the tritone has this sort of built-in dissonance to it. Ugh. Unlike the other intervals within a diatonic scale. But the tritone, not so much. Now apparently, due to its natural dissonance to the human ear, the tritone is commonly used in alarms and sirens. So this dissonance of a tritone makes it feel unstable and need to resolve. If you listen to a major 7 chord, it's settled, it's stable. If you listen to a minor 7 chord, it's settled, it's stable. Whereas that dominant 7 feels like it's lingering, waiting to be resolved. So I reckon, my theory is that the reason that these extra notes all work on top of a dominant 7 chord is because they exaggerate that instability. They build on that tension, waiting for the resolution. They kind of make the resolution even more pleasing to the ear because of that increased tension before the resolution. So let's talk a little bit more about that resolution, because it is quite interesting if you like this sort of thing. So a minute ago I played a 5-to-1 cadence, a G7 to a C7. That's a really common cadence. That 3rd and 7th of the G really naturally want to resolve to the major chord, the 5th below. So the 7th of the chord is dropping down a semitone to become the 3rd of the major chord, and the 3rd of the G is moving up, stepping up a semitone to become the root note. But it doesn't stop there, because the 3rd and the 7th of a G7 chord are also the 3rd and the 7th of another 7 chord. So instead of thinking about the F as the 7, we think of the F as the 3rd, and instead of thinking of the B as the 3rd, we think of the B as the 7th. We have the 3rd and the 7th of D flat 7. So a G7 and a D flat 7 both share the same 3rd and 7th, although inverted. And notice that the distance between a G and a D flat is a tritone. That would be the same for any dominant 7 chord. It shares its 3rd and 7th, albeit inverted, with a dominant 7 chord a tritone away. Got it? Okay, so getting back to our G7 D flat 7 connection. So D flat 7 is the 5 chord in G flat major. So a D flat 7 resolves naturally to a G flat major. So in the same way that a G7 naturally wants to resolve to a C major, G7, C major, a D flat 7 naturally wants to resolve to a G flat major. So because these two chords, the G7 and D flat 7, both share this unstable tritone, it means that a G7 chord doesn't just resolve to a C7 chord. A G7 chord can resolve to a G flat chord. Do you hear that? And likewise, a D flat 7 chord doesn't just resolve to a G flat chord. A D flat 7 chord can also resolve to a C major chord. So you could be playing something in the key of C. You want to resolve back to the C, but instead of using your G, you can use a D flat 7. And you would call this a tritone substitution. So you substituted the diatonic dominant chord for the dominant chord a tritone away. So if it's the unstable tritone that gives the dominant 7 chord its characteristic of needing to resolve, does that mean that any 7 chord with a tritone in it can function in the same way? If we look at a diminished 7 chord, we'll see it's constructed with a root, a flat 3rd, a flat 5 and a double flat 7. So we can see that, like a dominant chord, the interval between the 3rd and the 7th is a tritone. But not only that, because the interval between the root and the 5th is also a tritone. So we've got a tritone 3rd and 7th, we've got a tritone root and 5th. But if we look at the diminished scale, there's actually tritones throughout the whole scale. So does this function in the same way then? Let's have a look. Now to me, the diminished 7 chord definitely feels unstable, unsettled, like it needs to go somewhere else. So I guess it does have that same function, but does it function in exactly the same way? So we've already seen in our 5-to-1 cadences that what happens is the 7th drops a semitone and the 3rd raises a semitone and becomes the 3rd and the root of the next chord. So that would mean our B diminished should resolve to E flat. Does that sound good to you? Sounds good to me. So B diminished 7 resolves to an E flat major. If we look a little bit closer, that should make perfect sense, because the 3rd and the 7th of a B diminished is also the 3rd and the 7th of a B flat 7 chord. So we know that the B flat is a 5 chord of an E flat. So it makes complete sense that a B diminished that has the same 3rd and 7th would also resolve to an E flat major. But then if we also did what we did before, where we can invert our 3rd and 7th to become the 3rd and the 7th, which would be of an E chord, E7, that would mean, should therefore our B diminished also resolve to an A. It does. I think to my ear, yeah, it does. So now we've got an extra level here, because not only have we got the 3rd and 7th, which is a tritone, we've also got the root and the 5th, which are a tritone. So does that give us 2 more chords that this can resolve to as well? Let's have a look. So our root and our 5th, if we think of these as our 3rd and our 7th, well, that's going to be, this is recognizable. We know this from before, that this is going to be our 7th of a D flat and a 3rd of a D flat. So does that mean, therefore, that this is going to resolve to a... It does. So B diminished also resolves to an F sharp. And then if we do the same thing that we've done previously, that we invert the 3rd and 7th here to become the 3rd and 7th of another chord, this will be our 3rd and our 7th of G7, which should mean that that resolves to our C major. So let's have a listen now. Does a B diminished resolve also to a C major? Yes, it does. Cool, eh? So one more thing while we're on this subject. I spoke earlier about the 3rd and the 7th in major chords, major 7 chords, minor 7 chords, dominant 7 chords. Now we looked at diminished chords, but we didn't talk about minor 7 flat 5 chords or half diminished chords. So if we take our half diminished chord and we look at the 3rd and 7th like we have done before, we will see that this is perfect 4th, or if we invert it, a perfect 5th. So it's the same as a minor 7 chord or a major 7 chord. So this isn't the same as the tritone in the dominant chord. However, like the diminished 7 chord, the root and the 5th of this chord is a tritone. So the 3rd and the 7th aren't, but the root and the 5th are. Now does this mean that this can contain that same unresolved characteristic of the dominant 7 because it holds a tritone even though it's not the 3rd and 7th? Well, let's have a listen. Yes is the answer. Like, it doesn't feel resolved there. It doesn't feel settled. It does feel like it's going somewhere. So can we work out where this needs to be resolved to in the same way that we did before? So normally we'd take our notes of our tritone and we'd either step them out to resolve, or we step them in to resolve. So our B half diminished would either resolve to an F sharp major, G flat major, which does feel like it resolves. So you could be playing something in G flat major, but instead of using your 5, it works really nicely as a substitution. It gives you that same dominant feel, needing to be resolved. Works perfectly. So as well as that moving out to our F sharp, we can also move into a C. Now let's see if this works the same way. It does. I think to my ear, the F sharp sounds better, sounds more resolved. Oh no, that's good, that's good. So those are our two options for resolving a -7 flat 5 chord. Now the other interesting thing is, I love to use this cadence quite a lot, but differently. I like to use it from the second degree of the scale, so using my -7 flat 5 or my half diminished chord as my dominant unresolved leading chord to the tonic, but not to the C or the F sharp, but what would be the A. So if I was in the key of A, I like that, but that doesn't follow the same pattern, and I don't know why. I feel like that feels like a natural resolution. Yeah, so I'm not sure why that works. Anyway, that's all I've got here. That's all that I've been pondering recently. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments. Thanks for being here. See you next time. Maybe.